No worries.
So I just want to make sure.
Talk later because
Folks, please take a seat. Okay. At the open group, we use chimes. You know, basically, no, that's great. Okay, ladies and gentlemen. We are now fortunate. We've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. Now we see the very ugly side of policies and plans. Treasury board. No, it's great. We're going to be talking about the Canadian federal government's approach to responsible artificial intelligence. Speaking to us today is Benoit Deshaies. He's a director of responsible data and artificial intelligence for the Office of the Chief Data Officer, who's now Stephen Burke, okay, located within the Treasury Board of Canada's Secretariat. In this role, he oversees the development of the Directive on Automated Decision-Making and the Algorithmic Impact Assessment. For that, these policy tools aim to ensure that the use of automated decision systems by the federal government prioritizes transparency, accountability, and fairness, leading to more efficient, accurate, consistent, and interpretable decisions. So without further ado, over to you, Benoit.
Bonjour tout le monde. Hello. Let's start with this. So that's me. I was 2.5 at the time. I was in front of that little beige box you see here. That was the very first Macintosh, the Mac 128. So maybe it dates me a little bit, but it gives you an idea. This was 1983. And in my lifetime, there's been 4 big tech revolutions. This was the first one, the PC revolution. But soon after came the internet. Early 90s for me was when I was first exposed to this. I was very lucky that my father worked at the local university, and through this, sorry, I think there was transmission issues. And through the university, I got early access to the, sorry, I'm just gonna get this set up. Here we go. All right, sorry about that. Yeah, through the university, I got access to the internet. Is this working? I think so. Yes. All right, good. And afterwards, you know, the internet really was life-changing. It connected us to the world and all of this. But soon after, there was another revolution, you know, these phones we have in our pockets, the portable devices. And what it did was combine the power of the PC and the internet and made sure that we always had access to it. It was always with us. And these things really changed the way we interface with the world. It changes how I navigate, how I get places, how I communicate with my friends and my colleagues, how I pay, how I get entertainment, how I get my information. Like, it really changes everything. And now we have the 4th revolution, which is artificial intelligence. And I think AI is about the same time as what the PC was at that time, you know, the very first Macintosh. PCs had existed before that. You had the Commodore 64, the IBM PC, but they were in a way like a little bit clunky to use. You needed to be an expert and know programming to be able to use them effectively. They were limited in their capabilities, but the first Mac changed everything. It was easy to use. Everybody could access them. They were powerful. So I think we had that moment with AI where, you know, with the release of ChatGPT to the public 6 to 8 months ago, that was an aha moment for a lot of people. AI had existed for a long, long time before that, and it had been used very successfully by the large corporations. But for the average person, AI was not a tool that they could use, but this changed recently. So it's a little bit like that. And I feel very lucky in my role where at the Treasury Board, I set policies for how the Canadian government will use artificial intelligence. So, you know, in a limited capacity, I get to influence a little bit this revolution. There's others, of course, and there's other aspects, Yvan, you know, building the technology that enables this. But all of you, in a sense, as tech leaders, as you shape the way your organization will use technology, will use AI, you can also have this opportunity to shape this revolution. And it's a unique opportunity, really. Like within our lifetimes, there's not a lot of these like really big moments. And so what I want to do today is share a little bit some of the choices we've made, our approach to responsible AI, and maybe that can be useful to you. So as we look at AI, we're all quite excited about the possibilities. I'm not sure if you've seen what's coming up in the Office suite with Copilot, but it's really impressive. Like, I can't wait. The whole Office suite becomes a really smart tool. So I'm really excited about it. And, I use ChatGPT almost daily. It helps me edit text. It helps me do a whole pile of things. But at the same time, we're worried about, some of the stuff you see there. We're worried about the bias that can come with AI decisions. We're worried about unfair outcomes. We're worried, some people, about losing control, or at least losing our ability to understand how these tools work. So my role at TBS, in a sense, is creating the right conditions and the right ways in which we can use the technology while addressing these challenges and being successful with them. And it is possible to be successful in using these technologies, but it also means being selective about where we choose to apply them. It's not always appropriate. And it sometimes requires some hard work as well. So we need to be ready to put in the work for that. And to help us do that, there's a lot of tools that are available. And here I show it a little bit as a timeline. And that's what we saw in the AI governance community, or this world, where we started with principles, and then from this emerged frameworks, and then finally technical guides. But it's also what we see within organizations. So organizations tend to start by identifying their principles, the values that they want to uphold. And then from this, they create more precise guides. In 2017, 2018, up all the way until perhaps 2021, we saw a lot of organizations define what their AI principles were, their values they wanted to uphold as they use these tools. And a lot of them had very, very common themes. Most of them will talk about fairness and inclusion, addressing the bias. Do no harm is a common principle. We don't want AI to be used for bad purposes. Transparency, we want people to know where we use AI. Explainability, so we're worried about having these black boxes that we cannot explain. So that's something we want to counter. And accountability, we don't want to abdicate our responsibilities to machines. We want people to still be accountable. These things are important. There are values, but they're not sufficient. I think the challenge with principles is it's difficult to know when you've met them sufficiently. It's easy to see when you fail to meet them. So, it's usually a bad story or a negative aspect of it, but it's difficult to prove that you've sufficiently met these principles. But the advantage of principles is that they're enduring, right? As technology changes, these things remain relevant. In 5 years from now, in 10 years from now, being fair to people, being accountable, these will remain relevant. And so as technology changes fast and regulation often lags behind the principles can help guide us while we wait for the regulations to catch up. But then there comes a time where organizations, people want more direction, and the regulators also want to be able to enforce some of these things. So that's where the frameworks come in. They're more prescriptive. They tell people the steps and the actions they need to take in deploying these things. And they're very useful as well. And I'll speak to the Canadian Directive, the first one I've listed there, but there's many other great frameworks now available. But the frameworks are also not sufficient. So there comes a time when the developers ask, more precise questions, very technical questions, very precise questions. And that's where we need the technical guides, the technical standards. So if you're looking to adopt AI in your organization, you don't yet have a policy or a set of rules. I think, it's important to do things in order. You can't start writing a technical guide without having identified the principles that you want to uphold first. So it's important to follow this sequence. And the second piece of advice is, don't start from scratch. Don't reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of great work now that's available. So it's possible to steal, to copy, merge various frameworks, adapt them to your context. But yeah, don't start from scratch and reinvent the wheel. I'll just illustrate this a little bit more concretely with a concrete example. So, the principle of fairness. We want to ensure equal outcomes for everyone. But how do we do that? That's where the frameworks specify the how. The frameworks tell us that, first of all, we need to test the data and the models for the bias that can be present and take steps to address them. But that's done before the production of the system. Once the system is live, we need to continuously monitor the outcomes. That takes care of the substantive fairness, or fairness in the common sense. Is the decision fair? Another aspect is procedural fairness. Was the way in which we made the decision, was that a fair process? So for this, there's various requirements that can apply. For example, giving people notice before they're subject to automated decisions, giving people explanation. How was the decision made? What factors weighed into that decision? Giving people a recourse mechanism. So if they think a mistake was made, they can challenge the decision and it can get reviewed. There's human training requirements so that people understand the design, the limitations of the system, and then they can play the human in the loop role better. Human in the loop being people reviewing recommendations by the system and deciding whether or not to accept them. So this will take care of procedural fairness. But then, I mentioned at the framework level, we need to test the data for bias. Okay, I think as a regulator, for example, we can confirm that the activity took place. We can ask for evidence of that, but how do we know it was done right? And the developers may ask questions. Okay, what do you mean by fairness? What statistical test of fairness do you want me to use? And it may seem obvious. It may seem that there should be only one, but when you get down to it, there's many, many different models of statistical fairness. So which model is applicable when? It can be that you want equal opportunities across individuals, or you want equal failures across different groups of individuals. There's all these different metrics. So that's where the technical guides come in. And Singapore, for example, in their Veritas framework, Section 3A has a great discussion on when is it appropriate to use which fairness metric. And it's different whether it's a model to decide who gets benefits versus who you will go and take enforcement actions against. And then there's others that I mentioned on the previous slide, IEEE P7000, there's ISO standards on how to test the fairness of models that describe, the life cycle from the collection all the way to operating the model. At each step, what activities should be done. And ISO is a 24027 if you care. So up to now, I've talked about generic stuff. So now I will switch to talking a little bit more specifically in the context of the Canadian government, what we do. So the Directive on Automated Decision-Making, the name of it, Yvan mentioned, that's the prime policy instrument that we have to regulate AI in the government. And some people called it the Directive on AI or the Directive on Machine Learning. And as a matter of fact, that was an early name for this directive. But we changed it to automated decision-making because we wanted it to apply to any technology that's used to support decision-making. And something I want to mention is that this directive does not apply solely to fully automated decisions. You can have decisions that are partly automated. Perhaps the system makes an assessment about the client, and then that assessment is passed on to an officer, and the officer will use that as part of their decision. Maybe the system calculates risk score or the likelihood that this is fraudulent or not. But this will impact the final decision. So we want these use cases of partial automation to also be subject to this directive. And the directive applies to administrative decisions. These are decisions that will impact people's legal rights, privileges, and interests. So if you have a chatbot on your website to offer information, but that's also available through other means, for example, and what the chatbot is doing is deciding what information to present, that's not impacting people's legal rights. So this directive would not apply. But if you decide who gets service, who gets a job, who you will go audit or examine or take other enforcement action, who can get a permit, these are all examples of administrative decisions that this directive aims to regulate. It was published in 2019. So it was one of the very first set of mandatory rules issued by governments. This is a mandatory policy instrument. So federal departments have to comply with the requirements in this. And at the time in 2019, there were a lot of principles, but these were non-binding. So this was one of the very first in terms of binding requirements. And as a result of being one of the first, it did inspire some other work where people, adapted some of the requirements from this directive to their own context. And people also benefited from our early experience with this, and they were able to learn from our successes, certainly, but also some of the mistakes. Because it was one of the first, we didn't have a lot of evidence as to what would work, what wouldn't. So we took a guess and we landed pretty close to where we needed to be, but it was not perfect. But as a result of that, we also review this instrument on a regular basis. And that's a requirement in the directive. It's near the top, actually, where the Treasury Board is obliged to review it on a regular basis. And we've done 3 reviews so far. And the last update was April 25th, so very recent, and we made 12 substantive changes to this directive. And these reviews give us an opportunity to look at what worked and what didn't work in the government, but also look at other jurisdictions. They've done a lot of great work in their policies as well. So when they add a great idea, we borrow it and we can include it in the directive. So I think that's a great practice for policy instruments, is to really have a strict requirement in them to review them on a regular basis so they remain relevant. Sorry, here we go. So what are the objectives of this directive? Well, the 4 high-level objectives are here. First of all, we want to make sure that people are informed about where and how we use artificial intelligence to make decisions about them. A transparency requirement. We don't want people to be surprised by the fact that we use an automated assessment to make decisions impacting them. The second one is that when we do make a decision using artificial intelligence or other automated systems, we want people to be provided with a clear explanation as to how the decision was reached, what factors informed it, why did we make the decision that we did. We want to avoid the black box issue. The third item is that the decisions are fair and accurate. So we talked about bias, so we should take steps to identify those and deal with it. And the last one is we want departments to pause and consider the potential negative impacts, and then take steps to minimize them or to address them or offer alternatives if they're too high, for example. The first objective, I think you can all figure out how we do that, informing people, okay, we put the notice, probably some information on our website. But if you look at the last 3, how we achieve those objectives may not be immediately obvious. And we have a way, that's what I'll present, but I think it's still, the $1 million question is, how do you ensure these things? So here's a recipe for responsible AI in automated decision-making. These are a summary of the requirements of this directive. And I'll quickly go through the 4 main categories, which are the categories that you see present if you open the directive. The first one is the Algorithmic Impact Assessment, the AIA. It's a questionnaire. There's around 85 questions, and some of the questions are scored. So depending on your answer, where we offer multiple choice, you'll get more or less points to your assessment. And it does 2 things. First of all, it tries to determine the level of impact of a decision. what is the level of risk of that decision? And what are the impacts on the people affected? And then in the second half of the tool, it presents best practices that you should adopt to manage those risks, to manage those impacts. In looking at what is the risk of the system, it looks at multiple dimensions. So it starts by asking about the system. What type of system is it? What does it do? Does it do a risk assessment? Does it do image recognition? What does it do? Then the algorithm, how does it do it? Is the algorithm a complex deep neural network that's difficult to explain, or is it a simple set of rules that we can easily understand? Is the algorithm secret? Can you disclose the algorithm? Can you publish the source code, or is it something that you must keep secret? What data is used to inform the decision? Is it structured data coming from a form, or is it unstructured, like perhaps just free text or images? The decision itself, what is the decision about? Is it who's eligible for benefits? Is it permits? Is it deciding enforcement actions? And then considering the impacts of those decisions. How long do the impacts last? What are the impacts on? Are they on people's health or people's financial situation? Are they reversible, these impacts? How severe will they be for the people impacted? And then, as I said, following that is a set of best practices to manage those impacts. It starts with consultations, engaging the people that will be impacted by this, but also a lot of other consultations that I'll talk about a little bit later. But for example, your privacy team, make sure that you've engaged them to ensure the privacy of the citizens' data. But privacy is a section on its own as well, where we offer best practices. For example, have you de-identified the data that's used by the system, or have you de-identified the outputs as a way to preserve privacy? And then there's fairness best practices, logging, is the system providing explanation, and all of this. The second pillar is about transparency. And the first requirement of that, you can actually find it here in the first column, is the publication of the results of the Algorithmic Impact Assessment. We want the results of the questionnaire to be made available to the public. But there's others. I've mentioned earlier, providing notice of automation to people, and also providing them with an explanation. There's the release of source code, so we're transparent about the algorithm. Publishing results about the effectiveness. So once you've operated the system for, let's say, a year, publish effectiveness data about the system. And really, transparency is about making sure that there's no surprises where and how we use AI, that people understand how the decisions are made, and also provides accountability for the people deploying the system. The third pillar, very, very important and a core part of this directive, is about the quality assurance. We want to make sure that the decisions resulting will be good decisions. And there's many ways in which we achieve that. It starts with tech processes. So looking at the data, testing it for bias, for example, and that's done before, testing the models as well, looking at the outcomes and the predictions from the model. And all of this needs to be done before the system is put into production, but afterwards, also monitoring the system on an ongoing basis. Data quality is a core part of this too. So the directive speaks directly about the relevancy, completeness, and having data that's up to date, which is very important if you're going to make decisions. But we've also drafted over the past few years a data quality framework for the Government of Canada. And this framework identifies 9 dimensions of data quality. And it can really inform our approach to ensuring the quality of the data. And that's the starting point. Good data will give you higher odds of having good decisions. And then, so these are technical processes in a sense. The second half of the quality assurance is human processes. So human factors. It starts with consultations. Legal services must be engaged from the very beginning stages of the project. When you just have an idea, okay, let's automate something, legal services need to be engaged before any single line of code is written. Consult legal services. Employee training, I've mentioned, in terms of providing people employees that will use the system, understanding of how the system works, what are its limits, so that they're equipped to look at the output of the system and judge whether or not it's good and it's applicable to the case. There's human reviews of decisions. So for higher impact systems, the decision cannot be fully automated. People need to review those decisions. And one of those is also a peer review. So when we determine that the system is a medium or higher risk, we require that the third party come and examine the system, examine the algorithmic impact assessment, examine the quality assurance processes. Think about the potential risks of the decision and the system, and the risk mitigation measures taken by the organization. Are they sufficient? And provide advice to senior leaders before they launch the system, whether the system is ready to be launched, whether it will behave as it should. So that's an important quality assurance mechanism. And as of April 25th, the last update, we require the results of that review to be published as a transparency mechanism. But also, we think that people subject to these automated decisions, knowing that the third party came in and examined the system and opined that, yes, it's quality system, it can go live. That's reassuring to people subject to this. And the last category, recourse, we hope that mistakes won't be made. And because of all the strong quality assurance, these systems will provide good decisions. But mistakes, invariably can happen. So if people feel that the assessment was wrong, they want a review, that's what this last requirement is about, is for people to have access to a recourse mechanism where they can ask for a review of the decision. And at this point, you may be saying, well, Benoit, that seems like a lot of work, right? There's a lot of requirements, and yeah, it's going to be hard. And I'm going to paraphrase something my boss said that I quite liked. And to be clear, I like everything she says, and she's in the room today, so let's just make that clear. But there's something she said that caught my attention, and she was presenting essentially a similar presentation. And one of the stakeholders says exactly that. That's a lot of work. And her reply was, it is. And if you feel it's too much work, automation is probably not for you at this point. And I think that's quite right. Service automation using artificial intelligence has risks. It's not something to be approached lightly. And you need to be ready to put in this work if you want to be able to deploy this successfully. And I don't want to discourage you, because it is possible to deploy services using artificial intelligence, and federal departments have done that, and they're very successful, and their efforts, really deliver better services to the end user. One example I can give, and I know Emma was presenting earlier this week, maybe she spoke to it, but is employment insurance, where when you apply for employment insurance, you need to submit the form that says why you left the company. And likewise, the company needs to submit their own copy of a similar form that says why the employee was let go. And part of what happens before we, as the government, decide to grant employment insurance or not, is we make sure that both forms from the employee and the employer tell the same story. So maybe the employee says, I had a pregnancy, and the employer said the employee had a baby. Same concept, okay, the form can go through. Maybe somebody says, I broke my arm, and there was an injury. That's the same concept, can be matched. So what they've done is built a natural language processing model that looks at both, and if it can do a positive match, then the file goes to the next stage of processing. People get faster service, and they get EI payment quicker using this. But if the system cannot make a determination that it's a match, it could be because they use different language that the system has never seen. It could be because it's telling a different story. But in both cases, in any event, when the system cannot match, it goes to an officer, and the officer makes the determination. Is it a similar reason? And so what that does is the officers look at a lot less cases, because the obvious ones are matched automatically by the system. The officers have reduced workload, and they can process them quicker. So in the end, everybody gets faster service through this while maintaining the same quality of decision that we had before. And the team really took significant steps to ensure the quality of the predictions, both, the false positive, the true positives, and all of this. They were worried that the system would work better for Anglophone, for English forms because the volume was higher. So they really took significant steps to ensure equal performance in French and in English. And in the end, this is a system that's working really great for them, and they're getting great benefits. And ultimately, it's the Canadian citizens looking for AI that are getting faster and better service. So I'll go back a little bit to what I said. I talked about all the requirements being too much work. And I'll say, yeah, it is a little bit too much work in some cases. So an essential component of any policy needs to be proportionality. The requirements need to be proportional to the risks that you're trying to manage. You need to balance the need for innovation, the need for efficiency, with the cautious approach that's required in some cases. We don't want to be too burdensome when it's not required. And in the government, the wide range of decisions that we make, it's extremely different. They're very different from one another. So I'll give two examples to illustrate that. Maybe Parks Canada as an AI to automate the campsite allocation. So in the best case, you're on the side of the lake, you see the sunrise, the sunset. It's a beautiful camping site. You love it. And if you're unlucky, it puts you at the back of the woods. It's infested with mosquitoes. You have no view. It's not the best camping experience. But at the end of your weekend, a few days later, you ill from the mosquito bites. It's not life-changing, which campsite you got. So that decision is not the same as, let's say, a Correctional Services Canada deciding which prisoner will get conditional release. And to be clear, both Parks Canada and prisoner release, these are fictitious use cases. They're not actually using AI today, but it's just to illustrate the range of decisions that we make in government. They don't have the same impacts. Prisoner release impacts somebody's freedom, somebody's ability to earn a living, somebody's ability to be with their family. It's a very, very impactful decision, a lot more than a campsite. So you shouldn't treat them the same when automating them. The due care that's required and that's expected for something like prisoner release is going to be a lot higher than for campsite allocation. And the way we achieve this in the directive is through the Algorithmic Impact Assessment. So the Algorithmic Impact Assessment lets us measure the potential impact of those decisions, and it ranks it in 4 categories, 1 being low impact, 4 being very high impact. So back to my examples, campsite might be, level 1 versus prisoner release level 4. And based on the results of the Algorithmic Impact Assessment, the requirements of the directive will vary. The notice requirement, for example, at impact level 1, no notice is required. You can fully automate, and you don't tell anyone. If it's a medium impact level, we need to give a basic notice of automation. We say, by the way, the request that you've submitted will be processed automatically. And perhaps if you want more details, you can go view the Algorithmic Impact Assessment that's published here. At the higher level of impact, then the notice needs to be a lot more detailed. It needs to, first of all, provide the notice everywhere, but also provide information about the system. How does this system work? What data does it use? What audits were done on the system? And what were the results of these audits and so on? So you can see as the impact level increases, the requirement becomes more difficult to meet and more strict. It's the same for human in the loop, where people have to review decisions. Impact level 1, you can fully automate. So the campsite, nobody needs to review the individual decision. They still monitor the overall system, but every single decision does not have to be reviewed by an individual. But at higher impact levels, we don't allow that. So the prisoner release, if it was impact level 4, the system cannot fully automate that decision. All the system is allowed to do is make a recommendation. And then an officer needs to make the final decision. So you can see again how that brings proportionality. And so what I've presented so far is our approach to automated decision-making. But that's not the only use for AI, right? You didn't think I'd leave out ChatGPT and generative AI. So I'm going to talk about that now. And I've asked, ChatGPT to write me a joke that I could tell you. So why did the government AI refuse to play chess with the bureaucrat? Well, because it heard that in government, every move takes forever. And by the time it's your turn, the rules have changed. Haha, okay. It doesn't paint the government in the best light, but it's kind of funny and we see where it's coming from. But what I'm about to tell you is that this was the 13th try in the tool where I could get a joke that I felt comfortable showing to an audience. The first generation, the first 12 tries were really inappropriate. It made fun of our politicians in ways that I didn't feel comfortable showing. It made light of breaking the laws. It was demeaning to employees in the public service. All of this I considered inappropriate. And the reason I bring this up is it shows the challenges with generative AI. We really need to remain in charge. You can't just delegate, the creation of a presentation to the tool. We need to review the output, for example. So what I'm about to show you next is a bit of a scoop. It's the first time we show it to an audience outside of a very few limited public servants. So Ivan has seen it and provided advice in helping us build it, but very few other people have seen it in government. So what you'll see today is a world premiere. And these are our principles for the responsible use of generative AI. So in a few days, we'll publish a guide on the responsible use of generative AI by the Government of Canada. And we want the use to be consistent with these principles, the FASTER principles: fair, accountable, secure, transparent, educated, and relevant. And this will inform our approach to using these tools. And as you can see, we're back to principles. We're not yet at a framework the way the directive is. And the space of generative AI is moving incredibly fast. In my Twitter stream, like every week, it's really hard to keep up with the innovations and the new applications and all the great work that's happening. So generating a framework at this point, creating a framework would be challenging, but these principles will endure, right? In 5 years from now, fair, accountable, secure, this will remain relevant. And as I've said, in the absence of, or while regulation lags behind the technology, these principles can still provide useful direction. Now, it may not be obvious what we mean by each of those. Like, what does fair mean in the context of generative AI? What do we include under educated? So what I'll do next is I'll go through each one of these principles and tell you a little bit more about what they are, but just at a high level. You'll need to wait for the full guide coming out in a few days. So the first principle is fair. We want to make sure that the content that's generated will be appropriate. It does not amplify stereotypes. So still today, and it's unfortunate, but the generated content still can amplify stereotypes. So for example, it will portray secretaries as women and bosses as men, for example. That's not something that we're comfortable with, or that it's not aligned with our values. So that's problematic. It's true for gender, but it's true for any of the other protected grounds. So as we generate content, we need to review it to make sure that it does not perpetuate these old stereotypes. And oh, sorry, I haven't advanced the screen, eh? Here we go. Sorry. And you see toward the end, procedural and substantive fairness obligations. So it's not immediately obvious either, like what we mean by that in the context of generative AI. But let's say you use a generative AI to produce a summary of an applicant's case. We want to make sure that that respects the procedural fairness that these people are owed, that we will consider the full case, and that the summary will be of high quality enough that we can use it to base a decision on. So that's a little bit what we mean by that. The next principle, accountable. So you are responsible for the content that you generate. People will assume that you've written it. So act accordingly, right? Take ownership of whatever is generated. It is your work. So that's what the accountability principle is. So that means you need to review it for accuracy because these tools can generate inaccurate content. You need to make sure that it does not include any copyrighted material. And you're responsible for the previous principle, which is fairness, to ensure that the material is fair. Secure. This one is a little bit more obvious, but many public tools, you should assume that the data you provide to these public tools will be reviewed by the engineers of that company, may be used to train the model, later could inform responses for other users. There's a risk there. So assume that whatever information you provide to these public tools will be made public. That should be the assumption. Don't provide any personal or sensitive information to these tools. In short, assume that the tools are unsecure until you've proven otherwise and that you've put in place like the appropriate controls to ensure the security of information. Transparency. Don't try to fool people, right? That's maybe a good summary of this. Or do it accidentally. Let people know when you've generated content. Let them know you've generated a picture and you didn't go out and take this fantastic photograph. If people are interacting with a chatbot, inform them that it is a chatbot, it is an automated system, and they're not chatting with a live agent. With ChatGPT, I mean, you can be fooled. Like, we know that we're talking to a computer, but the responses are very good. And you could think that it's actually somebody on the other end. And, you know, so it's important to tell people so they're not deceived about this, especially if they're less familiar with this technology. So if you deploy chatbot on your website based on this, have like a prominent notice that it is an automated chatbot. Don't surprise people. Educated. So if you're going to use these tools, learn how to use them properly. Learn about the challenges of the tools, the potential inaccurate content that they can generate, the hallucinations. Learn how to detect them. Learn about the biases and the stereotypes that they can vehiculate. Learn how to identify and correct them. Learn how to write effective prompts. The quality of your prompt, the question you ask the tool, will directly influence the quality of the output. So learn to be good at writing these prompts. And it's really important to be proficient. Yvan, you spoke to job loss, and I won't talk at length about that, but somebody on the internet, which is a very trustworthy source, of course, said that you're not going to lose your job to an AI. You're going to lose your job to somebody who knows how to use AI. And I think that's very true. You know, people that know how to use these tools will be more productive, will be more efficient, will be better employees overall for a lot of domains. So it's important that we become good at using these tools. And the last, the R, relevant. AI is not the proper solution to every problem, right? So before you decide to use AI, you should make sure that it's relevant to your needs and to your clients and user needs. Don't, for example, if you know, after this, you're like, oh, I should really create an AI policy for my organization. Don't delegate that task to ChatGPT or any other generative AI. Don't ask it, write me an AI policy. No, use it as a tool to help you write it, of course. Write it yourself, define the principles that you want to use. Ask it about what other jurisdictions are doing. Confirm that that's really what they're doing, but you can use it as a research tool. Use it to help you edit the text. I'm a francophone, so when I write in English, it's not the best quality language. I often will ask ChatGPT to rewrite it for me, and it's more clear, it's better structured as the output. So that's a good use of it, but don't use it to make decisions about what your policies are, for example. And we've talked about the environmental costs earlier. So don't use it given these considerations unless you need to. And so that comes to the end of FASTER, but that's not sufficient. There's other issues in a way that we really wanted to bring people's attention to. So part of what our guide will have is policy considerations in all these areas. And for each area, we identify, first of all, like what is the challenge with that area? What is the challenge with quality, with bias? So a description of that. But also what relevant policies that exist today cover and speak to this. So if we talk about the legal risks, maybe it's intellectual property, there's laws that apply today for this. So it's important for people to be aware of them, but also the best practices. So given this risk, how can you not get around the risk, but how can you effectively manage the risk? So our intent was to equip people with the knowledge and tools they need to be able to use this effectively where it makes sense. So that's what our guidance will be. And it's rich advice. We don't have time to cover all of it today, but I hope you'll be excited and on the lookout for the publication in a few days. So to close, I wanted to leave you with this quote from Orly Lobel, our fantastic book, The Equality Machine. It's the best book I've read on this topic the past year, certainly very highly recommended. It's a very positive outlook on technology and how it can be a force for good. And it was refreshing because a lot of the books I've read, books I adore, like Weapons of Mass Destruction, for example, but it's more talking about the risks, the challenges with AI. Whereas in her book, she really tried to highlight where can technology be used and be a force for good. And as we all direct AI adoption, we need to consider how we can use it to assist our users, assist our clients, how we can be more inclusive using AI, how we can use AI to make the world more accessible. In conferencing software like Teams and Zoom, there's now auto captioning that let people with difficulty of hearing now, in real time, listen to conferences. It's fantastic. That's a good use of AI. In service automation, that's often the first time where we look at our historical data, what decisions we've made in service delivery, and we can take a hard look at what inequalities may have been present in those past decisions across various identity factors. So as we automate service, as we adopt a data-driven approach, that's our opportunity to correct those past inequalities. Back to my intro, the 4 revolutions that I've had in my lifetime. We're now living the AI revolution. And as digital leaders, we all have a chance to shape it a little bit. So let's use this opportunity to have a positive impact. And that goes beyond just technology and efficiency. Et puis sur ce, merci beaucoup. Thank you. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Benoit. Okay, sorry, I'm just here because of virtual world. So what I'll do is I'll ask, there's definitely questions out there. I would ask people in virtual world, make your questions concise, okay? So we don't have to sit there and read for 15 minutes on it. This would be a question direct towards colleagues at TBS. I don't understand what the question is here, sorry. I think I can provide a start of an answer to this. So I think it's asking for coordination in terms of how do we make the technology available within the government, whether it's ChatGPT, but I think in the future, Office 365, Copilot and things like that. Like, what is the plan to make the technology accessible to civil servants? And we are certainly talking and working very closely with different people. So with National Research Council, of course, with Shared Services Canada. And together they've first of all helped us come up with the guidance that you see there. They provided valuable input, but we understand that there's a need. We don't want every department to have to duplicate the work, right? So as these technologies come online, let's say the Office suite, we don't want every department to have to figure out how to configure and to secure that properly. So very mindful of that, and the agencies in the center are intending on providing direction on this. There's more than ChatGPT out there. Yes. Okay, there are other tools. Thank you. Yeah. Are we training any systems right now? Are we using unbiased data to train AI systems?
We are building AI systems in the government of Canada and often using historical service data. So departments have a rich history of delivering service, of course. And as part of service delivery, you need to capture, as part of your information management practices, you need to capture the factors that and the decisions. So document the decisions, but also document the what was the request made by the client. So this serves as the source of training data for a lot of service automation. And as part of that, it involves the analysis of the data to identify and detect potential biases and control for them and address them. So that's part of the approach. If you go on the open government portal of the Government of Canada, you will find 10 algorithmic impact assessments that are published from immigration, from Veterans Affairs, from ESDC, the employment insurance example I've provided. So you can look at those for examples of departments that have used their own data to train AI models.
Okay, great. I needed just a second there. Okay, just one more question. Is there sort of a community of practice for AI in the Canadian government?
There's many. There used to be an AI policy community of practice led by TBS, GAC, and ICED. Since the pandemic, it hasn't gotten together. We did maybe 1 or 2 virtual sessions, but it's fell aside. But there's many more technically minded communities right now. So folks within the Government of Canada can go on GC Exchange, GC Collab. There's some that are specific to natural language processing. There's one which is more AI models at large. So, and these are quite active communities. They meet on a monthly basis. They have hundreds of members. So if you're interested in this, you can certainly get involved through GC Collab, GC Exchange. Just go on these platforms and you'll find them.
Great. David, please.
I just wanted a follow-up question on the data. My name's Dave Anderson. I'm a consultant with D&D. Are you procuring synthetic data in order to establish a much more quality assured and larger data set with which to train your AI?
So the question is, are we purchasing data, including synthetic generated data, to be able to build better models in the government? And I can't speak to the individual scenarios of departments. So in some cases, the data comes fully from the department, that I know, but whether they purchase external data sets, I cannot comment on that, sorry. I know what they do in use cases, for example, in scientific use cases. So they'll purchase satellite imagery, they'll purchase various kind of survey data. But in terms of decision-making and administrative use cases, I'm not sure to what extent they're purchasing data sets.
Please.
So my question, I'm trying to, I'll have to frame the question without telling you the specifics of what was generated, but I'm wondering, you mentioned in one of the principles, it mentioned that you're responsible for making sure that the output is not using copyright or it's legal content. And I guess I'm wondering, like, to what extent, yeah. I'll get it out and then we'll see if I can find the question. But essentially, we don't know what the material that it was trained on. To what extent are we responsible for the output? And like, you know, with the risks of like, whatever materials are, especially for image generation, like the reason I'm asking this is my partner is really into like image generation right now. And he has learned to put very specific keywords to ensure like, it's usually adults portrayed, for example. So like, you know, if we're not able to access the training material, like what, to what extent are we responsible for that insurance? And then also, on the other hand, is there any tools that we, you know, that are in progress to help us detect some of that?
Yeah, thank you. Very good and relevant question. And it's not an easy one to answer. It's still an emerging area, right? But a lot of what I use, I'll give a few use cases just to illustrate that. If I, you know, write a piece of text and I ask ChatGPT to rewrite it for me, help me, you know, edit the words, it's still my ideas coming out. So I feel fairly comfortable that I'm not going to infringe on copyright that way. But other times I was a little bit more maybe ready to experiment, and I ask it, can you generate me something? You know, what should be my advice for this or something like that? And the output there, I'm very concerned that it's going to repeat what's present in blogs and, articles being posted and things like that. So what I'll do is I'll take snippets from it or these ideas and I'll go Google them, see, what I can find that will match those ideas. And sometimes it seems to be novel content. Other times I was able to find articles that sort of communicated these ideas, perhaps in different words. But so, I try to do due diligence that way to confirm that the material is not already present. So I just use my own search after, but it's a fairly demanding process. When people are using it for coding, so software development, you can use the tools to generate code snippets. And right now, a lot of them offer features right in the tool that will identify any code larger than X number of lines. It will scan GitHub, for example, and provide you close matches that you can review. So these tools are starting to emerge. It's baked into the GitHub Copilot, for example, and there you can turn on that filter to say anything that matches more than 3 lines of code in a public repo, do not generate it.
Okay. Question here?
Yeah, it sounds like there is a lot of collaborations going on within the government to develop all these directives and frameworks. I am wondering, is there any, because like what happens in the government is impacted by what happens out there and vice versa. I'm wondering if there is any, if you can speak to a little bit of what's going on in terms of collaborations with other governments and also with the private sector, what's happening right now.
Great question. So the question is about collaboration with people outside the government to help define these policies. And that's always been part of our approach. So the Directive on Automated Decision-Making was created in collaboration with a lot of stakeholders. We held workshops across the countries. So there were one in Montreal, Toronto, Ottawa, in the Prairies, in Vancouver, where many stakeholders were invited from academia, from private sector, just interested individuals, departments, of course. And this continues today. So as part of the third review, I've mentioned we review this on a regular basis. So as part of the last review, which lasted over a year, we've engaged with over 40 different groups that included researchers in the field. We went to the CIO Strategy Council to get feedback from industry members. We consulted with other governments, so with Ontario, with the UK, with the US, which have similar initiatives. So we engage very broadly in this. So thank you for the question.
Last question, Kenneth?
Yeah, my question is, are you happy with the way this is rolling out? Like if you were a king for the day, would you keep on going the way that you're going with? And I ask that because you talk to the departments, I know that when they track people coming across the border, they're still using like a manual clicker to track how many drugs. And like 90% of the Microsoft usage is just kind of themes, like they're not using and adopting the full suite of capabilities and automation. Do you think this is the best approach if you were thinking for the day and you could make whatever decision?
Well, and so the question is, do I think AI rollout in government is going as it should? And I'll say that from a policy perspective, I'm very pleased in the sense that we now have broad awareness to these policy instruments. And when departments choose to turn to automation, they're mindful of these requirements. They engage us. They want to follow the policy. So I feel that when the government chooses to adopt AI, it's going to be done in a responsible manner. So that's very encouraging. I think your point is, should the government accelerate its adoption of AI in other use cases? I don't have a clear answer to that. I think we need to look at what's being done. What are the possibilities? As I said, it's not every use case that's amendable to using AI, and we need to be mindful of our maturity as well. Do we have the right data to train these models? A lot of what government does is fairly unique. So you may not have rich data sets from industry or other sectors that we can use to train the models. So all of these factors will weigh in. Certainly, I hope that we don't shy away from using these technologies, and that's part of the direction in our guide on generative AI, is to say, look, this is not to be banned in government. You need to be mindful of the risks, take steps to manage them, use it where it makes sense, but do explore and think about where you can adopt them. Yeah.
Great. Well, Benoit, thank you very much for a great presentation. It's greatly appreciated. Just to note, the algorithmic impact assessment, that is, it's a world-class, world leader in that particular point. Ashley Cassavano was in Treasury Board before, a director in Treasury Board. She's now leading a non-government organization, okay, to basically support the use of responsible artificial intelligence. She's doing a great job. She's traveling all over the world, and she was one of the ones behind the algorithmic impact assessment. So anyways, without further ado, there is a ton of food out there. Okay, please, lunch is at the far tables. Breakfast or snacky stuff is at the front tables. So please help yourself. Fujitsu may be coming in to present. I will basically talk to you outside, but in the meantime, you got about an hour just to stretch your legs. Okay, and before the next presentation. Thank you very much for your attendance. Take advantage of the food, and I think it's still sunny outside, so you can take a bit of a stroll as well. Thank you.
C'est sur un banc en avant du Canada.